So we're going to be talking about Deleuze and Guattari's Capitalism and Schizophrenia project that spanned massive volumes and, well, Anti-Oedipus in 1972 and A Thousand Platos in 1980. And it is very famously dense within, well, the philosophy criterions, and it's very rigorous too. But we can get to, well, the complete arc of capitalism and schizophrenia within volume one, Anti-Oedipus. Just says, well, there's a micro level of psychology and capital where there's the desiring production. And the core idea of this would be, well, desire is not about lack, wanting what you don't have. It would be, well, desire would be a positive physical creative force. And the key concept of this would be, well, the desiring machines, right? Humans and
Mm-hmm.
their environments are just interconnected networks of energy. And the mouth would be a machine connected to, well, the breast machine, which is connected to the milk machine. And
Okay.
we get into, well, the psychoanalysis and the family and, well, what capitalism and schizophrenia is in volume one, right?
Okay.
Uh, and the core idea is just, well, traditional psychoanalysis, such as, well, Freud, Lacan, Freud and Lacan traps human desire inside the Oedipus complex, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
mom, dad, me. And
Okay.
the critique to this is Freud just turns desire into a private, neurotic family drama. And Deleuze and Guattari argue that desire is inherently social, economic, and political, and not just about your parents, right?
Right.
And the universal history of this, which is, well, the savage, barbarian, capitalist, right? And
Okay.
the core idea here would be that culture would be a history of how societies channel and constrain code desire, right? And then
Right.
there's like savage or primitive societies, right? And it's basically like code desire using physical body markings, kinship rules, and taboos. And then there's the barbarian, despotic societies, which means, well, over code desire under like a single ruler or state religion, like the king or emperor, it becomes the sole source of meaning. And then we get into the capitalist societies, which say, well, we decode everything. Money replaces traditional taboos, turning all values into market exchange value.
Right.
And we get to the fourth point of psychoanalysis. And the core idea of this would be what a clinical alternative to traditional psychoanalysis, right? And the goal
Okay.
would be that instead of like neurotically trapping desire in family drama, psychoanalysis just helps people see how their desires are tied to society, labor, and politics. And it just unlocks, well, creative, uncoded ways of living.
Yeah.
And then we get into volume two, which is A Thousand Platos, which is the macro level of culture and politics, right? And we get into, well, the rhizome, right? And what the rhizome is. And the core idea is that, well, knowledge in society shouldn't be structured like a tree, like hierarchical or top or down or central trunk, right? But like a
Right.
rhizome. It's underground root systems like a ginger or grass or basically a horizontal network that's connected at any point, right?
Okay.
And then there's the smooth and striated, right? And the core idea of this is that reality would be constantly moving between two types of space, which is there's the striated space, which is grid-like ruled, right?
Mm-hmm.
Grid-like ruled, state-controlled, highly regulated, like indexed to, well, city grids, borders, and timetables, right? And then
Okay.
there's smooth space, which is open, fluid, and unstructured, free-flowing, and indexed to, well, the open ocean or the deserts or improvisational music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into, well, the nomad and the war machine, right? And the core idea of this is that, well, the war machine wouldn't really strictly be about military war. It's just any creative force that resists being captured by the state. And nomadic thinking moves through smooth space and avoids, well, becoming a static or institutionalized, right?
Okay.
And part two of volume two would be, well, does Deleuze answer, well, what should be in the place of capitalism, right? And well, you asked me this before too, but the short answer would be no. He doesn't really answer in the traditional sense of proposing like a ready-made alternative blueprint, like a socialist state or like a planned economy or like a dictatorship or etc. Right? But
Right. How come?
losing Guattari, wait, what?
How come he doesn't answer that?
Yeah, I'll get into that. Well, in fact, losing Guattari explicitly reject the idea of providing a centralized top-down recipe or, well, blueprint for a utopian post-capitalist society. And the reasons why and what they really suggest instead is that, Well, for Deleuze, proposing like some sort of grand unified system to replace capitalism would just create a new overcoding system, or well, a new despotic, right?
Mhm.
Or a new despotic state or rigid bureaucracy, right? And it replaces well one hierarchical tree model with another tree model, right? And eventually leads right back to authoritarian control, right?
Mhm.
And then there's a concept of well, accelerating the process. So instead of really stepping back or retreating to traditional pre-capitalist lifestyles, Deleuze just asked that, well, should we withdraw from the word market or should we push further, right? And his
Mhm.
answer is to accelerate the deterritorialization, which he means, well, just push the creative boundary breaking aspects of desire so far that capitalism can no longer control, package, or profit off of them. And then we get into, well, what takes its place? And one of the answers that most people would give would be, well, the inorganic, right? Or, well, the micro political movements. So rather than some sort of one massive global revolution that replaced the system overnight, Deleuze just advocates for, well, micropolitics becoming minoritarian, right? And it's basically
Okay.
where creating localized, self-organized communities and basically artistic movements and lifestyle practices that operate outside market logic, right? And
Right.
then we get into well the rhizomatic networks, which well building fluid, non-hierarchical, solitary networks that can quickly adapt to and shift and evade well state and corporate capture, right? And then we get into well creating the smooth spaces where we carve out well physical and digital pockets where human interaction is governed by mutual creation and shared desire rather than well the profit, rent, or surveillance, right?
Right.
And then we get to well part three and the practical examples that Deleuze uses, or well, what I'll basically ask you, right? Um, I'll just say, let's say if you ask me the question, what does this actually look like in real life, and how would we apply this to real life physics and real life stuff, right?
Okay.
There's one where there's a tree versus the rhizome, right? And it's knowledge and organization. So the tree would be arborescent, right? So think of like
Mhm.
a traditional corporate hierarchy or a military command structure, and power flows from like the top roots, lower trunks, right, down to the bottom, which is going to be the branches and leaves. So if you cut the trunk, the whole tree just dies, right?
Right.
So then that would be arborescent. And the rhizome, think of like an underground ant colony or well the internet, right? There wouldn't really be some sort of foundational structure or basically some sort of headquarter for the ant colony, right? But if you block
Right.
one pathway, then a network instantly reroutes through like another point.
Yeah.
That would be the tree versus the rhizome, which is knowledge and organization. And then we get into well, the smooth versus created space, which is like control versus freedom, right? And created space would be like a modern city grid with sidewalks, traffic lights, property fences, and security cameras. And movement would be heavily be dictated and predictable, right? And
Mhm.
a smooth space would be like somewhere that's really open, like an open desert or a frozen lake or an unpaved forest movement. And movement would be like non-linear and determined by the traveler in real time, right?
Yeah.
And capitalism's game would be that while capitalism constantly takes smooth spaces like the early unregulated internet and creates them, turning them into subscription services and targeted ads and paywalls, right?
Yeah.
And we would then get to well the nomad slash war machine, which is the resistance, right? And Deleuze uses the word well nomad not only just for some sort of historical nomadic tribes, but for anyone who really moves through striated spaces without being governed
Sorry.
by their rules. Oh, okay. Um, So Deleuze uses the word nomad. You probably heard nomad from like AP World History or other classes, right? Uh, he doesn't really use it
Hang
for
on.
well.
Hang on. Like
Wait, what?
something's going on. Like you just like cut out the past 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. Wait, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so
It was like
Deleuze. Wait, what?
glitching and stuff. You were on
Uh,
nomads and war.
yeah. Okay, so you probably heard the term nomad, right?
Yes.
And Deleuze uses the word nomad, not really just for like historical nomadic tribes, but for anyone who
Mhm.
moves through striated spaces without being governed by their rules, right?
Okay.
Uh, So it's not really restricted towards one sort of traditional or historical nomadic tribe. And like a modern example would be like jazz musicians improvising like off script street artists painting over corporate billboards, or open source software developers creating free peer-to-peer programs that bypass big tech monopolies, right?
AI.
That's like an
Yeah.
example of it. Yeah. And we get into part four, which is the four big teaching takeaways from Deleuze, right? And
Hmm.
uh on capitalism and schizophrenia, the way to summarize Deleuze's contribution to these four core pillars for how I would do it for anybody, right? I would say,
Hmm.
mainly think of desire as creative. Think of it as, desire wouldn't be a lack of something. It would be an active engine that builds reality, right?
Yeah.
And then there would be capitalism decodes everything, which is, it melts away old traditions and taboos to turn everything into market value. And
Okay.
three would be the system recycles control. So meaning it frees energy only to recage it in consumerism or bureaucracy and identities, right?
Hmm.
And four would be resistance is rhizomatic, meaning that real change doesn't come from top down control, but from fluid creative networks. So um after that we would mainly get into losing guitars, political economy, and the state apparatus, right? And whenever we're talking about the mechanics of the state apparatus, which is going to be Opporelli the Estet, right? We're talking about, in A Thousand Platos, Deleuze and Guattari just developed like a rigorous taxonomy for how political power consolidates itself over time, right?
Right.
And the state itself wouldn't be, merely a government or like a set institution, or it would be like some sort of abstract apparatus of capture, which, hold on, I'm going to type this on the chat so you can look at it.
Okay.
This is how it would be pronounced, but the English translation is different. But it's apparatus of capture, which is
Yeah.
apparelle di capture, right? And it's the state apparatus that goes into all these three things, which is, wait, what?
Is that French?
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
It
there's
looks like Spanish.
French and Spanish are pretty like similar in some aspects,
No.
but
I know.
But then there's these three, which are rent, profit, and tax, right? Which
Okay.
captures land, slash, territorial space, which is rent. Profit would be captures labor and productive effort, and tax would be captures exchange slash monetary flow, right?
Hmm.
And the state would operate by converting variable, free-flowing human activity into mixed, manageable forms through three primary modes of capture. It would go from land to rent, and it would be, spatial territory is maps divided into private or public property and subjected to land rents, right? And we get labor to profit, and it says, creative capacity is transformed into, measurable units of labor power, yielding industrial or commercial profit. And
Yeah.
then there's, the exchange to the tax, and the fluid circulation of goods and money would be monitored, standardized, and, taxed to maintain the administrative hierarchy.
Yeah.
And we get into the axiomatic of capital versus the state code, right? And a critical distinction in Deleuze and Guattari, a critical distinction Deleuze and Guattari drew between traditional states, despotic or imperial states, and modern capitalism, how it lies in how they manage social order. There's, traditional states that use codes, and a traditional empire or monarchical state would rely on overcoding systems, such as, strict moral, religious, or legal codes. So, index to, divine right of kings, religious laws, caste systems, and that explicitly really define what every person can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And capitalism uses like an axiomatic way, right? And it says, capitalism operates without a rigid moral or transcendent code. Instead, it just operates on a set of purely functional axioms, such as, maximum market yield, right? Or lower transaction friction or expand liquidity. And the result would be that capitalism doesn't really care about, local culture or traditional religions or established social norms. So if a local culture can be monetized, capitalism just absorbs it, right? And if an old law restricts market growth, the axiomatic bypasses or alters it, right?
Okay.
And the micro the microfascisms of everyday life, and well,
Mm-hmm.
anti Oedipus, right? Um, Mitchell Foucault famously just noted in his preface that well, a book is like an art of living counter to all forms of fascism, right? And Deleuze and
Yeah.
Guattari argue that well, fascism wouldn't be well some sort of historical political movement like well in 1930s Italy or Germany, but it would be a pervasive psychological and social danger, such as well microfascism, right?
Yeah.
And microfascism, well, would be well the desire for rigid security, paranoia, policing others, fear of difference, and it would be fed by microfascism too, right? And it's well state power, total totalitarianism, parliamentary enforcement, and etc. Right? And
Okay.
microfascism occurs when individuals desire their own repression, when people actively demand rigid policing or well authoritarian control, strict social boundaries, and the suppression of difference out of fear or uncertainty or change. Right? And resistance to capitalism requires well identifying and dismantling these micro-fascist impulses within everyday social dynamics and relationships and political organizations. Right? And
Mm-hmm.
we get into well kind of the complete conceptual map of capitalism and schizophrenia, and we get into well the first part, which is primary reality, desiring production and well fluid energy, right? And we get
Yeah.
into well that leads to halfway through to the coding and terrestrialization, and from there we get into well the decoding and deterritorialization, and we get into well after decoding and deterritorialization we get into well freezing freeze energy and breaks taboos and creates smooth spaces, and we get into well coding and terrestrialization will lead to establishing rules, borders, and rigid identities that lead to the state apparatus of capture, create space, and forces overcoding. And from freeing energy, breaking taboos, and creating smooth spaces, we would go from to the nomad, or the constructs rhizomes and operates via the war machine, right?
Right.
And modern capitalism operates through an abstraction axiomatic thing, right? And it just decodes all traditions to basically monetize them, and then it just reterritorializes control into well consumerism, bureaucracy, and well the nuclear family, right?
Right.
And we kind of get into advanced analytical tools for teaching within well Deleuze's way of explaining capitalism, right? And the way I'm gonna teach this to you, right? I'll use well I'll use like brief summaries of these, right? I'll use the spatial diagnostic with well smooth versus striated, right? And we basically just ask how space, time, and human movement are basically being mapped, regulated, or liberated in a given environment. And then there's a organizational diagnostic within well the kind of like short lecture I gave on Deleuze, right? It's the tree versus rhizome, which I already told you about, how you analyze whether a group or system operates through a top-down centralized authority or through like a horizontal adaptable network. And
Yeah.
then we go into the affective diagnostic, which is, well, schizoid versus paranoiac, right? And we examine whether a political movement is driven by open creative boundaries breaking potential, such as, well, schizoid, or by fear exclusion and rigid border enforcement, which is paranoiac. That's mainly the only thing I'd say you would need to know to get past, well, what capitalism and schizophrenia is by Deleuze and Guattari. Um, do you have any other questions like on it specifically you want to ask, or?
I don't believe so. I think you've explained it pretty well in depth.
All right, all right. I'll just end this.